So, yes, everything's part of something. This was supposed to be a Prezi. Instead, it's a PDF presented as a slideshow. Okay, so the magic isn't here, but I'm not sure if you can see.
Yeah.
Everything is part of something. That's a photograph of a galaxy in the background, just to make my point. And every behavior is a part of interaction. I guess that's a kind of a background theme to this whole conference. I hope that it's got a essentially systemic view. Everything is, yeah, and things respond, and even to the things that they're a response to. So if you've been to this conference before, and some other times I've given a talk about response-based neurology. And in that, I used this as a schematic of a neuron, that neurons have an in part, and a middle part, and an out part. And in fact, the whole nervous system is organized on the same model, an in part, and a middle part, and an out part. So using that model of in and the middle and an out, every moment is a part of time perceived. So there's a past, now, and a future. They're all connected. Luigi Oscolo wrote a book called The Times of Time, which shows how time is connected. But what's useful about it is to see that by studying process and change, we can see abstract things like progress. Process and change help you to see progress. So an important point for me is that everything that we see is a transition point. It's occurring between things. And in this conference, just to make my point so you understand what I'm talking about, we have transitions between talks and breaks. Did you notice the transition between what was truly an excellent set of talks, and then there was a transition, and then this? The transition is important. And so transitions are responses to talks and breaks at this conference. My son pointed out to me that activities are interesting and good, but the transitions between activities have to be studied because that's where you lose time, or that's where you can pick up efficiency. And noticing how one thing changes to another is very often where the gold is. So I know this is quite a different theme than we just heard, so try to stick with me patiently if you can. Psychiatry at last. Yes, so I am a psychiatrist, and I'm your real deal. I suggest medications to people. I give ECT. I lock people up. I go into the emergency room. I'm your real psychiatrist. I'm the guy that you're talking about.
Nothing bad.
Just so you know. And, questions later, okay? Psychiatry itself is a response. That's the point. To industrialization 200 years ago, and science, 200, 250 years ago, the scientific revolution, and okay. Psychiatry is in a moment. That's why I mentioned time before. Are you starting to get that connection? Psychiatry is in a moment. Can you see? Really? Can you see? It was such a waste of time if you couldn't see. Psychiatry is in a transition. That's important to note so you don't give up. So these are psychiatry's moments about extreme adversity. These are moments that psychiatry has gone through in the past. I'm just going to focus in on them. And it's not my purpose to give a lecture about each one of these. It is my purpose to show that psychiatry has continuously been going through transitions. And so the original actual description of responses to extreme adversity, violence, occurred in the American Civil War with an American Army doctor named Acosta, and they named that after him, Acosta Syndrome. And his observation was pretty simple. He said, isn't it odd that armies march toward battle faster than they march away from battle? You'd think it would be the other way around, that they would be happy to get away from that and they would leave quickly, but they don't. they leave slowly. Water. That was their first medical conceptualization of responses to violence. So the other ones you may have heard of: shell shock, combat fatigue, brainwashing, post-traumatic stress disorder. I want to do a sound check. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So those are all ways of understanding how people respond to violence, and in the medical brain perspective. Currently, the current operating theory is trauma-informed care. So, and the future model is called response-based care, or response-based, what's it called? Practices. Practices. So that's just in the future. So what I'm pointing out is that things occur in a moment, and they transition, and they grow. So the American Psychiatric Association in mid-50s said, you know, we have to get more clear about what we mean by these diagnoses. We need to have vocabulary that we can agree on. When we're describing somebody, we have to be able to mean the same thing. So they made a diagnostic and statistical manual to help them do research, so they knew what each other meant when they said something. The first edition. Second edition came out basically when I came on board, which was a long time ago. And in the second one, I think homosexuality was still a disease. So how did it stop being a disease? How did it stop being classified as a disease? On the way to DSM-3. So DSM-3 was an sort of, you can call it a step forward or an improvement. You can also call it an admission that they were wrong in DSM-2. It's all wrong. Science is the business of showing that things are wrong. It's not the business of showing things are true. It's taking an idea and testing it to show that it's imperfect. That's what science is about. So every iteration, every new version of the DSM is confirmation that the previous one was screwed up. And the new one, DSM-5, everybody pretty much already agrees that the new one is screwed up. So most people agree with that already. So DSM-6, oh, please. No, I also want to say that it's not just the Americans. The World Health Organization has the International Classification of Disease, and it's in its 12th edition. So when I spent some time with World Health Organization, and when we were busy discussing the International Classification of Psychiatric Disease, the whole idea of the discussion was how to improve our understanding of it, and with full realization that the way we thought then was wrong. But it just happened to be the best we could do. We didn't know any better, and we still don't know any better. I mean, we know better than ICD-9, which is what I was fooling around with, and DSM-5. Well, there's quite a lot of research is coming out now, because I think the science of neurology and psychiatry is improving, so that there's more evidence that we're really screwed up. But the major diagnoses overlap each other. They don't have a lot of reliability. So, and the diagnoses like personality disorders and that they're recognized more as opinions. They don't have the same reliability as, say, a fractured bone. Or you know the story of gastric ulcer, peptic ulcer disease? Okay, so this guy had the idea that it was caused by a bacteria. Nobody would believe him, and he couldn't get it published. But he was sure of it, and so he drank this bacteria, a glassful of it, called Helicobacter pylori, and he, sure enough, got ulcer disease. And then he had been able to make those bacteria die with antibiotics until he gave it to himself, and then he couldn't cure himself. But he was able to convince everybody that ulcer disease was from this bacteria. And then it took him a long time, but he finally cured it. So he did live. And I'm not sure if he got the Nobel Prize, but he got a lot of recognition for being able to prove that what had been thought to be an emotional disorder, that like ulcer disease was from worry and being upset, was actually a result of an infection of Helicobacter pylori, and that it can be treated with antibiotics. The same, by the way, psychiatry won a Nobel Prize in 1902 or something like that, for discovering that syphilis, tertiary syphilis, was caused by Treponema pallidum. Because up until then, forget the name of it, tertiary syphilis was thought to be a mental illness. So there have been, that's how medicine works, is that you doubt everything and then you try to improve it. And that's what's happening in psychiatry about responses to extreme adversity. And so here's the point. These are some comments about how psychiatry sees suffering at the present time. They see mostly suffering as illness. When I say they, I mean we. Or if not illness, personality disorder. Or if not personality disorder, PTSD. So PTSD is post-trauma CSD. Right. Trauma is a Greek word, and it means wound. So the point about the word wound is that it belongs to the person who is wounded. Right? So I have a wound. It's my wound. It's very focused on the individual. Psychiatry's way of thinking, even presently, is all about the individual. The individual. So focuses on individual suffering. Psychiatry still doesn't have much of a focus on responses or interaction. That everything's a part of something. That there's a diagnosis that's been around for a long time in psychiatry that is classically part of something, and it's folie à deux. So, which is, psychiatry knows that somebody can appear really nuts, but they're with somebody else who's also really nuts, and I've seen this, and then you separate them, and the person, one of the people, like, suddenly gets better. Does that actually ring any bells for you at all? That if you separate somebody from the person they're with, that they could suddenly appear normal? Yeah. So folie à deux is rich for the craziness of two. So you see how psychiatry twists it even then. That the person was still crazy because they had folie à deux. It wasn't an adaptive response to whatever the situation was between the two. Are you following my logic about that? So the point is that psychiatry focuses on individual suffering. That's a problem. And even resilience, or the adaptiveness to stress, the ability for an elastic band to regain its shape after it's been stretched. You follow that? Even that is an individual phenomenon. It has nothing to do with community. Suffering or resilience is not seen as a community phenomenon. They're seen as individual phenomenon. So it's a problem. Psychiatry's in a moment, right? So last and last. So psychiatry's in transition. It's in a moment. Response-based practices can add something. And to me, what they can add is that everything's a part of something. So if you see, and I do see, people in the emergency room who appear really nice. But if you come into it with the attitude, and you can do this, that this must be a part of something, then that's completely different than coming into it with the attitude, wow, is this person ever nuts? You see what I mean? So response-based thinking can add awareness of social response. Things fit, and how we respond to people changes things. So, for example, I was at a Department of Psychiatry meeting last night, and a psychiatrist said, when people are admitted and locked up in our emergency room, but they're from another city, it's not good for them. And he referenced trauma-informed care. He said, in the principles of trauma-informed care, we should be more careful than that, because we should be aware that we can traumatize people, that we can do harm in our attempt to be kind or good or caring for them. So he's so close, because like he's aware in that statement that we can make things worse for people. But he hasn't quite crossed over to seeing that the person is taking care of themselves already, that their suffering belongs to something else, and if we can extend our awareness to what it is this behavior is about, then we can do more. We have a longer lever. We can actually be useful for them. I was very taken. Where's Vicky? Right. I was very taken with your statement about what the hell was it now? No, I forgot it. But it was about just being aware that what they're going through is adaptive. And I had a moment ago to quote it, but it was right on the money about what I'm trying to get at here. That social responses, how people act when you're in trouble. If people act like appreciatively, or the word dignity is correct. I like the words respectfully and with curiosity. That in itself makes a huge difference of uncorking a person's health and their ability to show you that they're actually doing well. Good, because otherwise you might not see it. That's what this conference is about. That there's a gap between the person's internal experience and what they're showing you. If psychiatrists need to know that we're not necessarily seeing the whole thing. So mind the gap. Maybe the person's too smart to show everything. That's what you were saying. I have to earn this person's trust. I have to be worthy of them telling me about this. And so I go to a seclusion room where the person's locked up with 2 policemen outside the door to meet somebody in the emergency room, and how I make my entrance will determine how they act with me, how crazy they look, and what I can do. So I can kind of bluster in, or I can walk in and sit down as though I trust them and say, are you thirsty? Do you need some water? Do you need some food? Or whatever, and really play it by ear, but with the idea of dignity in my head and how totally undignified the situation is when somebody has completely unraveled. That's for all of us, and life does unravel. It's not psychiatry's fault that people's lives explode and they are brought in handcuffs in the backseat of a police car to the emergency room. But it is our opportunity to respond to those situations in this way, with awareness that we're not getting the whole picture, that their behavior is a part of something, that this moment in their life is a transition moment, that this might be a moment with a keyhole in it, and if we have the key, this could be a great moment for them. So I'm talking about psychiatry, but that's only because it's about me. It is really all about me. But I hope that what you're hearing is it's also about you. That's my timing trick. I've still got like 7 minutes to go. I did this so fast. That's okay. I'll take a question later. So I think that we each have a responsibility to look after ourselves and to take care of our own health. And what Vicky was saying about getting strength and feeding off people who come to us for help, like saprophytes. Yeah, it's true. Actually, I am inspired and strengthened and feel myself more worthy because of the people that I work for. And so I totally identify with what you said about that. And that is also a way of me looking after myself. But we also have a responsibility to our community. So I think the activism comes to mind as a way of taking care of your community. It's really true. Another way is to just keep plugging along and believe in these things when nobody else around you seems to believe in it. And that's been one of my ways of doing it. So stubbornness, sticking with the program. And so I guess I'm done. There probably isn't a question anyway.